I have seen very few fights, physical altercations, thefts, B&Es. You're allowed to pursue your livelihood in absolute freedom in Singapore. And that's something that's not brought up in the international media a lot.
Meet Brian James Tracey, a Canadian who moved to Singapore 26 years ago. He started with a private practice in pediatric sports and military medicine and now runs a company in medical diagnostics. Brian told me why so-called draconian Singaporean laws don't bother him, whether the American dream has been lost in the West, and what's wrong with Singaporeans being so hardworking. I'm Max, let's go.
Do you go to Canada often?
Nope.
No? Why not?
Canada is lawless right now. I know here in Singapore that I do not want to contravene the authorities and the police. And in Canada, it's a revolving door. Two guys, I think, had over 400 arrests in Vancouver. And it's a revolving door. They're being eaten to support their drug habit. So they legalized, I don't know if you realize, in Vancouver, they legalized all drugs, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin. And these are people who cannot take care of themselves. And when you're a taxpayer in those countries and you're supporting their habit, and they're not capable of performing a livelihood, I'm sorry, I would stop paying my taxes. I would start a movement of even 2 or 3% of 40 million people and saying, I'm not paying my taxes while this rubbish is going on. You're not doing this on my dollar. But Singapore has got a straight, clear message that don't mess around, and you don't. And you will grow to respect the authorities. You know, I have nothing but the respect. When I see a police officer, I am not afraid of him. In this country, I'll go up to him, as I said, and I'll ask him a question. And the government is probably one of the most efficient governments in the world. My public transport is perfect, efficient, really cheap. Housing is expensive, and the other costs of living need to be addressed in Singapore. But how the society functions, you're never going to have anyone come up to you in Singapore and accost you or look to combat you. Yeah. Or, there's no drug-raged individuals ranting on the streets. It's really an optimal society that way, because I really believe that you need, for again, that small minority of any population, give them an inch, they'll take a yard. That's the weakness of the Western culture, and it's a revolving door.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a quick story. Well, the last time I went back to Canada on my 50th birthday, I went to Vancouver. And on a bright Saturday morning, I walked down, have you ever been to Vancouver?
No.
Okay, well, I walked down Granville Street. Vancouver is a very small city, 72 blocks, and then downtown is 14 by 16 blocks. And I walked on a bright Saturday, July morning, downtown, just dressed the way I am now, clean and professional. And I had 5 youths come up to me, and one of them pulled a knife on me and said, hey, you rich SOB, give us $50. Give us your wallet. And I looked at him. I said, wow. I said, I haven't been in Canada in years, and this is my welcome. I said, no. And they looked at me. I said, I left home when I was 16, and I put myself through 12 years of medical school, and I said, take a look at my knuckles, the scars. I worked in labor as a construction and carpentry for 12 years, putting myself through school. I said, I understand life can be really rough sometimes. And the 5 of you, you're robbing me in broad daylight at knife point? I said, I'm going to give you $100, but you're going to have a 3-minute lecture, the dad lecture that you never had. Because I'm sure most of you are good kids, and maybe you've fallen on tough times, maybe your father was an alcoholic and beat you. I said, I'm going to give you, if a police officer comes up, I'm going to say I'm giving you a donation of $100. And I gave them a $100 bill, and I gave them a 3-minute dad talk about, life's not fair, life's not easy, but I said, 2 of you are probably going to end up dead in the next year or 2. But I said, you got a really good mouthpiece on you, and I could see that you've got clear eyes. If you go, you could probably be the assistant manager of that store in 6 months, and you could be probably the manager in 2 years, and you can save your life, because you guys are headed to nowhere. And that was the last time I was in Canada. I really feel Singapore is an incredible land of opportunity. It actually provides an Asian equivalent of the original American dream.
That was American dream in the US, but you think it's still there? Oh no. Oh, now it's like Asian dream.
Asian dream, yeah. The United States and Canada socially are very fragmented. I have sisters in the United States, and I'm fearful to approach a police officer. Last time I went, I was in the wrong neighborhood with a BMW convertible, and I had a police officer stop me, take his hand on the gun, and said, I had Canadian plates on my car, summertime convertible down, and he pulled his gun on me, said, you're in the wrong neighborhood, what are you doing here? And fortunately, I gave him my sister's address, and He said, okay, you're going to follow me.
You have a lot of kids, right?
Yeah.
Children and grandchildren.
Yeah, 6 grandchildren and 6 children, but they're all in Canada and the Philippines.
Why not Singapore, if I may ask?
As an entrepreneur, the fact of international school, my 4 schooling boys, well, my 2-year-old, I don't believe in putting my children below the age of 5 to school. I homeschooled my children, all my boys, until about age 5 or 6, where one went to preschool here. But the cost of international school, and it's very difficult as an expat to get your children into local school. It's almost impossible. So that would cost me $200,000 a year for international school for 4 children. That's a limitation about being an expat in Singapore, to be honest.
Yeah.
There's an apparent, very right-wing element in Singapore society and law enforcement, but you can operate in this country in total freedom if you do not contravene the law, which is what a society is supposed to be designed for. And this ultimate liberalism and woke culture, sorry, I raised my eyebrows. I'm all for being a loving, compassionate individual, but there are a certain element in any society that if you give them an inch, they'll take a yard. In other words, unrestricted freedoms, there will be a disruptive element that, I'll give you an example. Vancouver, a small city, just over 1 million people in Vancouver proper, had 2,200 deaths from fentanyl overdose last year. That's wartime statistics. And I do not believe that they need to be criminalized. They need social help. They need counseling. They need medical intervention. They need compassion. And I don't believe that you should execute people for drugs. Drug pushers, yes, because you destroy families and you kill families. There are areas of Vancouver and Seattle and Portland and San Francisco and LA, sort of pick on the West Coast, that you cannot go into.
Yeah.
It's lawless and it's absolute anarchy. And they are taking a massively disproportionate percentage of resources from taxpayers. And if I'm a Canadian citizen, but I'm not a Canadian resident. I haven't been for almost 3 decades. And I would start a movement to boycott paying my taxes for policy that's absolutely ridiculous. And in Singapore, you don't have that. They let you know that if you are going to become a criminal element, if you are going to become a drug addict, you will be dealt with rapidly and harshly. And I agree with that. I have no worry about leaving my wallet on a table in this country, my mobile phone. It's almost as close to as, it's not absolutely 100.0% crime free, but I have seen very few fights, physical altercations, thefts, B&Es. You're allowed to pursue your livelihood in absolute freedom in Singapore. And that's something that's not brought up in the international media a lot. They look at the draconian laws, but they're there and rarely implemented. As I said, I can go speak to any police officer on the street here, and they're trained in public relations. They go, yes, sir, how can I help you? And I say, I have a question about,
Yeah.
So Singapore actually, as I said, it can be perceived as very heavy-handed, but in actual practice, it's really good because it stops that small element, that 10 or 20% of society that will take advantage and, give an inch, take a yard. And you do not see that here.
Yeah, I fully agree. I always like saying that people the misconception about Singapore that it's super strict, but in reality, it's not. I mean, people make fun of not the chewing gum stuff or you get a fine not flushing toilets after you.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, what's the point not to flush in toilet? I mean, if you're not flushing toilet in Singapore, I'm pretty sure no one will be after you. Okay, you just walk away and that's it. But I mean, you're supposed to flush your toilet.
Yeah.
And it's not something that that's freaking fine. I always need to remember that I flush toilet. It's just to make sense.
Well, and they're not afraid to set precedent. This is about 20 years ago. One of my friends who was a managing director of a global bank got caught littering on Orchard.
Yeah.
He just threw, a wrapper, and he got nailed and flagged. And they made an example of him.
Yeah.
That he had to show up for 4 weekends, Saturday and Sunday, from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. with his work correction order vest, bright orange vest, and a pair of tongs and a garbage bag. And you better believe they took his picture and put it on the Straits Times and made an example of him, And no one's above the law here.
Yeah.
And that is a really, no society is perfect or egalitarian across the board, but they will really set case precedent here
But I think 20 years ago, Singapore was stricter. I think.
Yeah.
30 years ago, it was stricter than 20 years ago.
20 years ago, you couldn't have visible tattoos. Man, there was a case of a physician from South America, and South American Latino culture has some very flamboyant characters. And long story short, he was transiting through Singapore, and he had a bright yellow suit on and a fedora. He obviously was a really sharp dresser. And they didn't believe that he was on his way to a medical conference as like a guest speaker in Australia. And they did not allow him to transit. This is 25 years ago.
Yeah.
They didn't believe it. They said, you look like you're involved in the sex trade.
Oh my God.
Basically. And yeah, but they have become, because the traditional expat family, there's a lot of single expats now because of the cost of living, with, international school being $40,000, $50,000 a year, a condo. I live locally. I live in a HDB. I have a roommate who's a medical doctor. I help him transition into Singapore society. And so I live locally. And we have a world-class transportation system. Everyone goes, a car is 500% the cost. But you don't need a car in Singapore. I have a world-class system that operates from 5:30 in the morning till 12:30 in the morning. And it runs every 3 minutes. And it's super cheap, and you don't basically need a car in Singapore. Maybe if you have actually active school children. You said your 2 children, you got 1 youngster, but you have 1 school-age child.
They're a bus transfer. Most of the schools do.
And it's safe. You can allow your 7-year-old to go on public transport in this country by themselves without any fear. Yeah. Russia, Canada, we have sporting culture. And here people work so hard. Even the students, with PSLE. Which is primary school leaving exam, is an incredibly stressful event. The Asian work ethic, and it's why Asia is driving the world economy now. I mean, the United States is resting on its laurels, is actually slowly reinventing itself. That's one of the strengths of Western culture. But Asians just work. Their work ethic is incredible, and their devotion. I've lived in Japan as well, and the Japanese are almost closer to a corporation than they are with their immediate family. They're dedicated and very long. They often live and work in the city and then go back out to their home and family on the weekends. So the Asian work ethic is extraordinary. The evidence about ASEAN, when you're looking at, 600-700 million, and it's such a growing economy. And a tremendous strength. One element that I do like about Canada is the universal free medical care system, but it's being overtaxed and overwrought. So it's difficult to get efficient service. But here, I had 5 knee surgeries because from sports injuries, and I skied professionally for many years, and that was $300,000.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But I had very good medical insurance.
Insurance makes complete sense here in Singapore. And you actually, as a foreigner, you have to have it.
This is something that will need to be addressed because Singapore has an incredibly aging population. There's only 3.4 million Singaporeans. And we have a mandatory savings program called CPF, Central Providence Fund. And of that portfolio, there's a MediSave component. But you have to put the funds in for your own medical care. And I'll tell you that one critical illness, you can go through $50,000 or $100,000. And I would say that the majority of Singaporeans do not have adequate coverage and do not have adequate funds in their MediSave. And with an aging population that Singapore has, that's something that the government is going to have to possibly address. We have one of the longest lifespans as well in Singapore. Canada, not sure about Russia, but we have an 88, 86-year lifespan. And people are living that beyond now. So,
and the reproduction rate is pretty low. It's like 1.1.
Singapore has the lowest birth rate in the world. And I believe, actually, I had a television program, Love Airways, that was looking at the low fertility rate in 2004 with Dr. Wei Xiang Yu. And we explored the reasons sociologically, economically, and housing for Singaporeans having such a low birth rate. And I believe it comes down to economics. An average Singapore family almost spends $1,000 a month on tutorial for even PSLE, primary school leaving exam, which is grade 6 or 7. And the pressure that these children are under for academic performance is significant. And even public housing here, my HDB, that's $850,000. And I bought a beautiful farm in the Philippines for $150,000. Huge farm. And I bought a beautiful cabin on land in Canada for, 1/3 the price of that. So housing costs, even in public housing, is extraordinarily high. Very, very high, the cost of living. As I said, you can get by without a car. But, local school is very low price. I believe expats, it's $700 a month if you can get into local school. But the pressure cooker and the tutorial costs, just the cost of living for average Singaporeans, and if you look at the skewed economics, we have one of the highest levels of household income. But there's one thing about the hardworking Asian population, and I will point out the Chinese without being racist, that a lot of Singaporeans work 2 jobs. They work one predominant job and maybe they work in the family business on the weekend. Or talk to your Grab driver or Gojek. Because of the exorbitant cost of living, not everybody, if you're making $5,000 a month in Singapore, that's a good salary. And that's only $60,000 a year in Singapore. And so when you see the average household income, that's reflective of 2, most possibly 3 or 4 incomes. So Singaporeans are very hard working. In the early 2000s, it was quite noted that Goh had a very pro-foreign talent because, Singapore was a new country, less than 50 years old at that time. They realized that to develop the depth of necessary talent at the C-suite levels, not just calling yourself an executive, but actually being on a C-suite and learning to run, local, national and international corporations requires foreign talent. It's a young country. Goh Chok Tong and especially Lee Kuan Yew, when he founded the country, he took 700 or 800 people and sent them abroad for their education and experience. And brought that back. And that was really one of the early differentiators in Singapore's history. But now, especially COVID was an exacerbating global challenge, if you will, that really shut down, Singapore, especially globally, shut down for about 2 years. That sort of forced the hand of a lot of multinational corporations and individuals and families to say about the sustainability, because we had no idea about how long COVID was going to last, right? And the global response wasn't very good. So I'd say that was one of the precipitators, and that's coming up 5-6 years ago now. And since then, Singapore has rebounded very rapidly economically. And I gave a talk to there's 3,000 employees in a health club at this one major bank. And I had a number of families. They had a going away party for 30 families in November because they all had their rents put up 30 to 100%. And one of my friend's families, he went from $6,000 to $12,000 a month rent for a condo.
For my friend, it was like from 6.7 to 14.
Yep, there you go.
They left to France to his parents for half a year. And they spent half a year there, and then they came back and find another place, but in the central Singapore.
Yep, my friend, he's a brilliant Italian. He's a data scientist. And he said on $250,000 salary a year, fortunately his wife works for the same bank, he could pay the tuition for his 2 daughters and the rent, not a toothbrush. And $250,000 on the global scale is a significant upper echelon position. You're not any multimillionaire by that status, but at that level, a life in Singapore became untenable and over 30 families left, and it's going to be a real serious challenge for Singapore because of the cost of living. Once it goes up, you can't put it down. When you come here cold call as a foreigner and, as an expatriate, as a Caucasian, whether Russian, Canadian, Italian, whatever, it's very difficult to get to learn. As I said, I'm blessed now with incredible depth of local partners. But Asia has one incredible thing, and I learned this practicing medicine in Japan: relationship, trust. And that's built after 10 years. Singapore does provide that opportunity, but it takes the time to build the relationship with locals to garner their trust and that you're part of the country. And funny enough, I guess I've never asked to become a citizen because they know how many children I have and that I can't afford to have a total of 6 grandchildren and 6 children in Singapore. Even as I said, if you're on rare packages now, most corporations only give a set sum for multinationals. So that is a very hard aspect to be a family person in the corporate world in Singapore now.
How many languages do you speak fluently?
French, English. I speak 3 forms of Bahasa Indonesia, Bahasa Melayu, Bahasa Brunei. Tagalog, Filipino, Japanese, still remnants of, I just find languages a gateway to opening people.
Yeah.
And being primarily a medical specialist, it's always a great way. Like for Alliance Française, I'm a listed provider, even though maintenant je parle français, comme beaucoup meilleur comme la Sorbonne, mais dans l'histoire, mon accent c'est comme pour le Québécois. Quebec French is a very old French.
Yeah.
And they used to laugh at my French.
Bahasa and Tagalog. What's the story behind it? Why you learned it?
Singapore has a very robust Indonesian community.
Yeah.
There's a lot of long-term families because of the potential instability, and this is one great credit that reflects upon Singapore. I can't really call Singapore a truly multicultural because we have CMIO, Chinese, Malay, Indian, and the others is just over 1% of the Eurasians. And Canada and Russia reflects many peoples. Canada, if there's 160 nations, there's 160 Irish Canadian, Russian Canadian, Japanese Canadian, French Canadian, you name it. And Indonesia, without breaching into sensitive subjects about religion, there is the Chinese minority, a very significant minority of a population of about 260 million. The Chinese are in an extremely viable financial position compared to the indigenous population of Indonesia.
Right.
So a lot of them have families here. This is where Singapore is truly multicultural, is in food. It's a real strength to the culture, and I think once you're an expat here in Singapore, you get a taste, and it's not all spicy. There are, Thai and some different forms of the Chinese food.
Yeah.
But it's a really unique strength, and I'd actually like to see this model exported to the rest of the world, that you can go in one center and have access to, it's great for entrepreneurs and small businesses, because there's probably over 100, 150 restaurants here.
Yeah.
And each one of them serves a unique fare. So it's quite a strength of Singapore culture, is the food culture. I think every expatriate, when you get out away from the American club, really get to experience the Singapore aspect of food.
Basically, that's how Singapore also mix different kind of backgrounds of people in Singapore, because they basically can come and kind of mingle in the hawkers.
Yeah, it provides a very good social venue. That's a very astute observation, Max. Here, we have Southern Chinese, you name it. Chicken rice,
everything.
which is Taiwanese.
Basically everything.
Yeah, there's nothing that you can't get here.
Yeah.
And, just looking at the table behind me, there's 3 Chinese, 1 Indian, and 1 Malay.
There you go.
Provides the essential mixing ground, which was one of the really important predominance on Singapore, I'd say, policy, from housing to schools.
You're in Singapore for 26 years. You PR here, right? I believe.
Yeah, I had to become a PR because of my access to military bases and the military.
But your citizenship is Canadian.
Yeah,
right?
and as I said, because probably the number of children I have, they know they've never asked me to become a Singapore citizen.
Yeah.
And I mean, to tell you the truth, as a PR, if I was under 40, I would have been responsible for military service. We have 2 years mandatory national service, which I think also is a really good idea other countries should look at. It's not a deferment about entrance into university. It is a growing up for basically when you turn about 18, 19, you do 2 years of national service. And I believe it should be for men and women. But I believe whatever your profession, I don't care how much money you make, you must be of service. And if you do that, you can have a good conscience, you can make good money, and use that to be socially responsible. I believe if you have a gift, physically or especially intellectually and emotively, a lot of men need to develop our EQ. You can have a really very, very high IQ, but you need to extend compassion to people. Not everybody's got it easy, and I came from some pretty years. I was actually homeless for a year, and I lived in my truck because it was either pay the rent or go to medical school. So I lived in my truck in Canada. So, I haven't been a wealthy individual of elite status, but I had a dream to go to medical school. It took me 12 years to do 3 medical degrees, but now I'm able to really impact people's lives in a positive manner. And now I'm utilizing that background to develop intellectual property and to develop companies and to develop technologies that impact people's lives, to really make a difference in the quality of healthcare because I've spent my life in healthcare, and I think that's one of the most important things.